The Vote of Exile. The Galactic Council chamber stretched wider than any human cathedral ever built, a dome of silver and glass that hung over a sea of alien faces from every corner of known space. They had gathered to cast judgment on one world, a small blue planet on the edge of the spiral arm that had caused more disturbance in 2 short centuries than empires had managed in thousands of years. The hum of voices filled the hall like the buzz of insects, and when the great gong rang, silence fell across the chamber. The High Chancellor of the Council rose with his many limbs folding in ceremonial grace, and his deep voice echoed through the chamber. Today, he declared, we decide the fate of Earth and its people. Humanity has shown itself reckless, ungovernable, violent. They spread like fire across the stars, refusing to bow to the order of the Council. We vote now on their exile. At one end of the chamber, the human delegation sat stiffly, their faces pale under the harsh lights. Ambassador Steele clenched his fists so tightly the blood drained from his knuckles. His aides whispered, urging calm, but rage burned behind his eyes. They had known the vote was coming for months, but the weight of it still pressed like a mountain on his chest. Around him, alien representatives hissed, muttered, and flashed signals of disdain. The humans had always been outsiders, never trusted, never welcomed, only tolerated because they could not be ignored. Now that tolerance was being stripped away in a single act, one by one the votes rang out. The reptilian corps hissed their assent for exile. The winged Ouvrions shrieked their support. Even the cautious Oln, who often stood apart from council politics, cast their stone into the bowl. The tally climbed with brutal inevitability until the Chancellor's voice thundered final. By near unanimity, Earth is exiled. No ship of theirs may enter council space. No trade may be given, no aid offered. Their colonies beyond council borders are abandoned. They are cut off. The chamber erupted in sound, some in celebration, some in satisfaction, and some in unease. For beneath the grandeur of the vote, many still remembered what humans had done in wars past. They remembered how quickly humans adapted, how fiercely they fought, and how unpredictable they became when cornered. But those doubts were drowned beneath the roar of triumph. Humanity was cast out into the dark. Ambassador Steele stood slowly, his eyes sweeping across the hall. He did not speak, not a single word, for there was nothing to say that would change this verdict. Instead, he turned his back on the council and walked with measured steps from the chamber, his boots striking the polished floor like war drums. His aides followed, heads bowed, yet in their hearts a storm was brewing. On Earth, news of the exile spread within hours. Screens in crowded cities flickered with the council's decree. Some wept, fearing the collapse of trade, fearing hunger and isolation. Others clenched their jaws in anger, shouting that the aliens had never truly wanted humanity among them. In the halls of government and in the hidden bunkers of the military, leaders gathered in tense silence. They had been rejected, stripped of allies, and cut off from resources, but humanity had always thrived in adversity. This was not the end, it was the beginning. Across the colonies, the reaction burned hotter. On Mars, miners raised their fists, cursing the Council. On Titan, scientists tore down alien monitoring devices in defiance. In the orbital shipyards, workers halted for only a breath before returning to their labor with grim determination. They would finish their ships not for trade but for survival. In the dark quiet of his private quarters, Ambassador Steele stared out a window at the distant stars. His chest ached with shame, but his mind turned toward resolve. They had not begged for mercy, and they would not start now. Humanity had been thrown into exile, yet exile did not mean death. It meant freedom from alien oversight, from their laws and from their chains. Steele whispered to the night a phrase that soon many would echo. If they cast us into the dark, then we will learn to own the dark. The Council believed it had ended humanity's ambitions with one vote, but far from the glittering chamber, a spark was catching flame. Across Earth and its colonies, anger hardened into resolve and resolve into action. Humanity had been given no choice, but one remained always clear. They would not wait to be told twice. They would not bow, they would rise. The last transmission, the human delegation returned to Earth in silence. Their ship cut through the void like a wounded animal, carrying with it the weight of rejection. Ambassador Steele stood at the viewing deck as the blue sphere grew larger in the distance, his reflection staring back at him in the glass. His aides spoke little, for what could be said when an entire species had been cast out of the known galaxy. When they finally touched down, the landing platforms of New Geneva were already crowded with leaders, generals, scientists, and ordinary citizens who had come to see their fate with their own eyes. The Council's decree had reached every ear, but seeing their ambassadors return empty-handed sealed the truth. Steele walked down the ramp and faced the cameras, his voice steady, though his heart felt raw. He spoke not of defeat but of decision. He told them the Council had exiled Earth, that they had been deemed too dangerous, too uncontrollable, too different. But he also said they had been freed. No more interference, no more alien hand directing human progress, no more leash around their necks. The crowd was hushed, torn between fear and the spark of something else. Then from somewhere in the mass of people a single voice shouted, "Let them exile us, we will endure." The words caught fire, spreading until the square shook with the roar of thousands declaring the same. In the following days, Earth's networks filled with debates, arguments, and raw emotion. Farmers asked how they would feed billions without alien trade convoys. Engineers asked where they would get materials once cut off from Council suppliers. Parents wept at the thought of their children growing up in a galaxy that wanted them gone. Yet beneath the fear, a pulse of defiance beat louder with every hour. History had shown humans at their best when abandoned, left to claw their way forward, with nothing but grit and stubbornness. They had done it in the deserts, the mountains, the oceans, and now they would do it in the stars. The President of Earth convened the Emergency Council in the War Hall beneath the Capitol. Generals with steel in their eyes sat alongside scientists, their hands stained with ink and metal dust. Economists calculated grim numbers while explorers from the colonies reported their supplies. Around the table, silence fell as the President looked at each face. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "We can kneel and fade, or we can stand and build. Which do we choose?" No one spoke of surrender. The decision was unanimous. Across the colonies, preparations began. On Mars, great tunnels rang with the sound of hammers as miners carved deeper to secure rare ores. On Europa, engineers redirected power grids to fuel hidden shipyards. On Titan, laboratories long restricted by alien regulations now ran at full capacity, reviving forbidden projects, once locked away by Council decree. Humanity no longer sought approval, they sought survival, and more than survival, they sought strength. Amid this storm, a message was drafted, a final transmission sent across the stars to the Council. It was not a plea for mercy nor a cry of anger, but a declaration. The message spoke of rejection and betrayal, but it also carried a warning. Humanity would not beg nor vanish into silence. They would adapt, they would grow, and they would thrive beyond the reach of the Council's shadow. The last line burned with quiet menace. "You cast us out into the dark. Do not forget who taught themselves to master fire." When the transmission ended, ambassadors in alien capitals laughed, dismissing it as human dramatics. To them, humanity was cut off, isolated, destined to collapse without the networks of trade and security that bound the galaxy together. They saw the last transmission as the bravado of a species unwilling to accept their fate. But among a few voices, more cautious murmurs rose. Some remembered the ferocity of human soldiers in wars long past. Others recalled how quickly humans learned, how stubbornly they endured. And though the Council chambers remained triumphant, unease began to creep like frost around the edges. Back on Earth, the reaction to the transmission was electric. Citizens replayed it in crowded halls, repeating Steele's words like scripture. The colonies transmitted their vows of loyalty, swearing that no alien decree would sever them from the homeworld. Factories once devoted to civilian luxuries were converted to arms production. Families volunteered for service, and schools began teaching survival and engineering alongside history and art. Humanity's exile had not broken them. It had bound them together with iron threads. In the quiet hours, Steele walked alone through the city streets, watching children play even as their parents whispered about war. He thought of the Council's vote and how easily those alien voices had cast humanity aside. They believed Earth would shrink into nothing, but Steele felt in his bones that they were wrong. Every exile in history had carved new paths. Every banishment had sparked revolutions. Humanity would not fade. Exile was not the end. It was the spark of something larger. And so the last transmission faded from alien networks, yet its echo lingered in the hearts of every human who heard it. The Council believed they had silenced Earth, but in truth they had awakened a storm that no vote could contain. The first response in the weeks that followed the exile, the world changed in ways no one could have predicted. Cities once drowned in routine now pulsed with urgency. Every workshop, every laboratory, every field turned toward a single purpose. Humanity would not sit idle waiting for famine or despair to consume them. Instead, they began to plan and to build. The exile had stripped them of comfort, but it had also removed chains long hidden. Technologies once locked away by alien oversight suddenly resurfaced as dusty files were pulled from archives and experiments thought too dangerous. For council approval found new life in a vast underground chamber beneath the Andes. Engineers gathered around a towering frame of steel and composite plates. This had once been a prototype starship shelved after council inspectors claimed its power systems violated stability laws. Now, with no inspectors left to stop them, the team labored day and night welding, forging, and testing until sparks lit the cavern like stars. On the lunar shipyards, old freighters were torn apart and rebuilt into something leaner, sharper, and far deadlier. Children watched from rooftops as trails of fire crossed the sky carrying supplies to orbit. Where once there had been hesitation, now there was only determination. On Mars, miners turned into soldiers and scientists alike. They carved tunnels not only for ore, but for shelters and supply caches, preparing for a future no one had dared imagine. The red planet echoed with chants of unity as banners of Earth hung from colony walls. On Titan, laboratories lit up with activity. Biologists spliced alien genes with human crops to grow food in the harshest conditions. Physicists worked on weapon prototypes that had been forbidden for centuries. A quiet revolution spread across every human settlement, a refusal to wait for permission to survive. Meanwhile, the rest of the galaxy watched with casual disinterest. Alien spies reported back to the council describing humans as scavengers, picking through scraps desperate to cling to life. They spoke of miners hoarding rocks and engineers repairing junk freighters. Their reports were read with smug amusement. Let them struggle, the council said. Without our networks, they will collapse within a generation. Yet those same spies never saw the hidden meetings deep in the bunkers, nor the prototypes tested in the shadows. They did not see the spark in human eyes when they spoke of tomorrow. Ambassador Steele knew that the council's arrogance was their blindfold. He met with generals in secret chambers, where maps of the galaxy spread across glowing tables. Red markers showed human colonies now vulnerable, while blue markers showed council patrol routes. The generals debated fiercely, some demanding immediate retaliation while others urged patience. Steele raised his hand and silence fell. We cannot meet them head-on yet, he said, but we can prepare. Every ship we build, every weapon we forge is a message. When the day comes, they will learn exile was their greatest mistake. His words carried the weight of prophecy, and those who listened carried them back to their people. The first response of humanity was not a grand strike nor a public defiance, but a quiet, relentless preparation. Factories shifted production lines from civilian goods to armor plating and engine cores. Schools trained youth not only in mathematics and literature, but in navigation engineering and survival tactics. Farmers became strategists as they planned how to feed billions without alien imports. Everywhere the same truth echoed, we will endure. Whispers began to circulate among the colonies of a fleet forming in secret. They called it by many names: the Shadow Fleet, the Forgotten Armada, the Black Ships. No one outside the highest command knew the full truth, but every worker, every soldier felt it in their bones. Something was rising, something forged, not in peace but in necessity. In dim hangars, young pilots touched the hulls of their vessels with reverence, as if they were touching the future itself. Steele walked through one such hangar one evening, his footsteps echoing beneath the curved ceiling. Rows of ships loomed half-finished, bristling with weapons designed by minds finally freed from alien limits. He paused before one and placed his hand on the cold metal. Around him, mechanics worked tirelessly, sparks flying into the air like embers from a fire. He thought of the council chamber and the smug faces of those who had cast the vote. They believed humanity would wither. Instead, humanity was preparing to bloom into something the galaxy had never seen. The first response to exile was not despair, but creation. 1,000 plans hidden beneath 1,000 hands, all working toward the same future. The galaxy thought Earth silent, yet the silence was only the inhale before the storm. The rise of the Black Fleet months passed since the decree of exile, and while the council went about its affairs, with arrogance and ease, Earth and her colonies worked in silence. Outwardly, the human worlds looked ordinary, as though they had accepted their punishment. Traders from neutral systems still passed by the Sol system and saw nothing more than miners at work or freighters hauling cargo. They reported back that humanity was shrinking into itself, licking wounds and fading into irrelevance. What they did not see lay hidden beneath veils of secrecy in vast caverns carved into mountains and beneath oceans, in shipyards cloaked against prying eyes. The first of the new warships emerged from those shadows, not with fanfare, but with the quiet pride of a people who knew what they had accomplished. Unlike the sleek vessels of the council, These ships bore sharp lines and black hulls that drank the light. Their engines burned hotter, their weapons heavier, each system born not from alien design but from the raw ingenuity of human minds set free of restrictions. They were not made to impress. They were made to survive and to kill if needed. On the day the first completed ship was unveiled, the workers gathered in silence in the hidden dock of Titan. The ship rose slowly from its berth, massive and grim as though the void itself had given it form. No name was spoken, for names would come later. Instead, the crowd of engineers, miners, and scientists simply stood together, knowing they had given birth to something that would carry their people forward. The Black Fleet had begun. Soon more followed. On Mars, a massive carrier slipped from underground docks, its launch concealed by storms of dust. On Europa, frigates were built small and fast, their hulls coated in alloys mined from deep within the ice. On Earth, old orbital rings were repurposed, forging cruisers whose armor could shrug off weapons once thought unstoppable. Each new vessel carried not only weapons, but the will of a species determined never to be cornered again. Whispers began to spread across the colonies, and the whispers carried beyond them. Traders who ventured too close to human space vanished, their signals cut off without explanation. Patrols sent by curious neighbors failed to return. The galaxy began to murmur of human warships prowling the void, painted black like shadows moving between stars. Most dismissed the stories as exaggerations, but fear lingered in the background. The Council had cast humanity into exile, but now that exile seemed less like punishment and more like the birth of something they could not control. Ambassador Steele was summoned to the secret war council held in an old fortress buried beneath the Alps. Generals unrolled star charts. Across long tables, their markers spreading outward from Earth like roots. They spoke of patrol routes, of weak points in Council defenses, and of colonies that might soon come under attack if humanity remained passive. Steele listened before speaking with calm authority. "We do not strike blindly," he said. "Our fleet is young, our resources stretched, but every ship we build changes the balance. The Black Fleet is not only our shield, it is our voice. When we appear, the galaxy will listen." In the following weeks, the Black Fleet spread quietly, testing maneuvers in the far reaches of the system, training pilots who had never known war beyond stories. Young men and women learned to fly with precision, their hands steady, even under the crushing stress of combat drills. Soldiers trained in zero-gravity boarding drills, and engineers perfected systems that allowed their ships to vanish from sensors. It was a transformation not just of technology, but of spirit. Humanity was no longer a collection of scattered colonies waiting to be punished. Humanity was becoming an empire forged in the shadows. Alien spies returned to the Council with confused reports. They spoke of black ships that appeared from nowhere, of freighters armed with weapons far beyond their size, of colonies that seemed to vanish behind clouds of interference. Most of the Council laughed at these tales, dismissing them as paranoia. Yet a few more cautious voices whispered warnings. They remembered that humans had always thrived when underestimated. They remembered too well the stories of old battles where a handful of human ships had turned entire campaigns. Back on Earth, the people themselves changed. Where once there had been fear, now there was pride. Children spoke of joining the Black Fleet one day. Workers wore symbols of their new navy with honor. Families hung banners in their homes painted in dark colors representing the shadows where humanity grew strong. The exile had united them in a way no treaty ever had. The Black Fleet was not yet vast, not yet invincible, but it was enough to send ripples through the galaxy. It was enough to remind the Council that humanity was no simple species to be cast aside. And as each new hull slid from its dock, humanity moved one step closer to reclaiming not just survival, but destiny. The return strike. The galaxy expected humanity to retreat into silence, but silence was never in their nature. Once the Black Fleet had grown strong enough, the first missions were ordered, not grand invasions, but precise strikes chosen to send a message. At the Council table beneath the Alps, the generals marked a border world belonging to a species that had voted loudly for exile. The world sat on the rim of Council space, defended by light patrols and dependent on trade routes that humans had once helped to maintain. Now those routes would become the stage for humanity's return. The operation began under the cover of deep space storms. Black Fleet cruisers slipped from shadow, their hulls scattering sensors so that even nearby patrols could not detect them until it was too late. The first strike came against a convoy of Council freighters carrying food and medicine. The human ships emerged from the void with engines burning cold and weapons hot. Within minutes, the convoy was disabled, its escorts left adrift. Instead of taking the supplies, the humans transmitted a single message in every galactic tongue. "We are not gone." Then they vanished, leaving the ships damaged but alive. It was a warning, not an execution. The Council dismissed the incident as raiders until a second strike followed only days later. This time the target was a military outpost on the border. The humans did not destroy it outright. Instead, they infiltrated, captured the garrison, and stripped the base of weapons before departing. The soldiers left behind reported with wide eyes of human efficiency, of discipline, and of shadows moving through corridors like ghosts. The word spread quickly across the galaxy. Humanity had not collapsed. Humanity had returned. In the colonies, the news ignited a fire of pride. Families gathered around flickering screens to watch grainy footage of Black Fleet vessels disappearing into hyperspace after daring raids. Children cheered, and workers in the factories worked harder than ever, knowing their labor-fueled victories. Humanity had always needed stories to bind them together, and now they had new heroes whose names were whispered across settlements. Pilots like Commander Reyes, who led the first boarding, Action, and Captain Leon, who brought her cruiser home after crippling 3 patrol ships in a single engagement. But the return strikes were not only military victories. They were psychological blows. For centuries, the Council had believed itself unshakable, the supreme authority of the stars. Now reports poured in of their convoys vanishing, their patrols crippled, their border worlds humiliated. Panic spread among merchants who relied on safe routes through human sectors. Insurance rates climbed, trade slowed, and the quiet fear grew that exile had not weakened Earth but strengthened it. Ambassador. Steele received secret transmissions from nervous alien leaders who had once cheered the exile. Some offered quiet words of caution, others begged for assurances that humanity would not target their worlds. Steele replied with cold politeness, reminding them of the vote that had cast Earth into darkness. "You told us to stand alone," he said, "and so we shall. Remember that when you see our shadows at your borders." His words were repeated in council chambers until even the most arrogant delegates began to squirm. Meanwhile, the Black Fleet refined its tactics. They struck swiftly, always choosing targets that humiliated but rarely slaughtered. The message was clear. Humanity did not seek to destroy blindly. They sought recognition, strength, and the respect denied to them. Each raid ended with survivors who carried tales of human skill and human ferocity. These stories spread faster than the Council could suppress them. In one daring raid, a squadron of human frigates appeared above a mining colony that had refused aid to Earth after the exile. Instead of attacking, they shut down the orbital defenses, hacked communications, and broadcast the image of Earth's flag across every screen. Then, as quickly as they had come, they vanished, leaving the colony stunned and trembling. The miners whispered afterward that it felt like a storm had passed overhead, leaving them alive but shaken to the core. The Council finally called for an emergency meeting. Delegates shouted accusations demanding stronger patrols, heavier fleets, and immediate retaliation. But beneath the bluster was fear. Humanity had been cast into exile, and yet here they were striking back with precision, daring, and an iron will that could not be crushed. What had been meant as punishment had become transformation. Back on Earth, the people no longer spoke of survival alone. They spoke of destiny. The return strikes proved they were not powerless. They were not forgotten. They were carving their place in the galaxy with fire and steel, and though their fleets were still small, each victory grew their legend until the stars themselves seemed to whisper that humanity was rising. The galaxy trembles, the Council had grown restless. The raids of the Black Fleet could no longer be dismissed as isolated incidents. Entire sectors whispered of human shadows that appeared and vanished like storms. Merchants refused to send ships through former human corridors. Colonies on the rim trembled each time their scanners flickered with unknown signatures. What had begun as rumor had hardened into truth. Humanity had not faded in exile. They had grown sharper, stronger, and far more dangerous. The Council called for unity. Fleets were dispatched to the borders, massive armadas flying banners of a dozen worlds. Admirals swore they would crush the human threat with overwhelming force. In their arrogance, they believed numbers and tradition would be enough. They had not understood that humans had been studying them from the dark for years, learning their tactics, their patterns, and their blind spots. When the first great confrontation came, the galaxy watched with bated breath. It began near the Kalari Nebula, a swirling mass of gases that bent sensors and swallowed signals. A Council fleet of nearly 200 ships moved to cut off human activity in the region. Reports had spoken of Black Fleet patrols harassing convoys and vanishing into the mist. The admirals believed they could corner them with brute strength. But when the nebula lit with fire, it was not humanity that was cornered. It was the Council. The Black Fleet emerged from the storm like predators, smaller in number but swifter and deadlier. They cut through the larger formation with brutal precision. Human warships fought like extensions of their crews, darting in and out of the nebula, using every shadow as cover. Council ships struggled to adapt their rigid formations, collapsing into chaos as frigates were picked apart one by one. Pilots screamed of black holes materializing behind them before their signals vanished. In less than an hour, nearly half the Council fleet was destroyed or disabled. The rest fled limping into hyperspace, carrying tales that would haunt them for generations. Word spread faster than light. The Council had faced humanity in open battle and had not won. On distant worlds, alien citizens whispered in shock. Some spoke in fear, others in awe. The humans were not only surviving, they were rewriting the balance of power. For the first time in centuries, the Council looked weak and divided. The tremors of that realization shook the galaxy deeper than any weapon could. On Earth, the victory was not met with celebration, but with resolve. The generals reminded their people that the fight was far from over. Resources were stretched, every battle strained their fleets, but morale soared higher than the stars. Children in classrooms repeated the names of Black Fleet captains as though reciting the legends of old. In the colonies, banners of Earth flew proudly where once alien symbols had dominated. Humanity had become more than exiles. They had become a force. Ambassador Steele stood before the hidden council once again, his voice calm but carrying the weight of destiny. "We are no longer asking to be heard," he said. "We have been heard in fire and steel. The council will return with greater fury, but let them come. Every strike, every battle, every sacrifice strengthens us. They will learn that exile did not weaken us. It freed us." The room erupted in solemn agreement, for each of them knew the truth. Humanity had stepped onto a path that could not be turned aside. The council itself began to fracture. Some delegates argued for peace negotiations, fearful of further humiliation. Others demanded all-out war to erase Earth once and for all. The great alliance that had ruled the stars for millennia now found itself paralyzed by a single species it had once thought beneath notice. Fear is a powerful seed, and within the chambers of power it grew unchecked. The galaxy trembled because it had seen something it had long forgotten. It had seen the will of a species that refused to break. Humanity no longer fought for survival alone. They fought to claim their place, to carve their destiny into the stars, and the universe itself seemed to lean closer to watch what they would do next. A new order, the council chamber was no longer the seat of triumph it had once been. The towering dome that had echoed with laughter when Earth was exiled now carried only tension. Delegates whispered nervously in their corners, some pale with fear, others flushed with rage. The reports from the front had grown impossible to ignore. The Black Fleet had shattered patrols, had humiliated border worlds, and had defeated a fleet that by all calculations should have overwhelmed them. Humanity was no longer a nuisance. Humanity was a threat. The High Chancellor stood before the assembly, his voice booming across the chamber, but it carried none of the confidence it once held. He called for order, but the delegates shouted over him, demanding action, demanding reassurance. Some cried for peace talks, others for annihilation, but beneath all their words lay a single truth: they had lost control. The exile that was meant to weaken Earth had instead transformed it into something beyond their grasp. On Earth, the atmosphere was very different. The victory near the nebula had spread like wildfire, and though leaders warned against arrogance, the people could not help but feel that destiny itself had shifted. Factories ran without rest, shipyards glowed day and night as new vessels joined the fleet. In the colonies, celebrations broke out not of drunken joy but of hard pride. They knew the cost of this struggle, but they also knew its meaning. Humanity was no longer at the mercy of the galaxy. Humanity had seized its own path. In a hidden chamber beneath the Alps, the Human Council gathered once more. Generals laid out star charts showing new territories that could be secured. Scientists presented weapons that only months earlier would have been forbidden. Colonists sent pledges of loyalty, their messages filled with determination. And at the center of it all, Ambassador Steele rose to speak. His words carried across the room and into the hearts of all who listened. "We were cast out to die, but instead we were reborn. We will not beg to return to the Council's embrace. If they wish to speak to us, they will come to our table and they will listen." The day came sooner than anyone expected. A council envoy arrived at the edge of human space, escorted by a fleet that bore white banners of truce. Their ships trembled as they entered the shadow of the Black Fleet, whose dark hulls glimmered like blades in the void. They were led through silent corridors to a chamber where human leaders waited. Gone were the days of begging or compromise. The humans sat with quiet authority, their eyes sharp and unflinching. The envoy delivered their message the council wished to negotiate. Steele replied with calm words, yet beneath them was the iron that had carried humanity through exile. "We do not seek re-entry," he said. "We do not seek your approval. We will deal as equals or not at all." His voice echoed like thunder through the chamber, and the envoys, though they bristled, knew they could not walk away. They had seen the battles. They had heard the whispers. The galaxy itself was shifting around this small blue world and its scattered children. Across the stars, alien citizens watched in silence as rumors of the negotiations spread. Many who had once laughed at Earth now wondered what their own fates would be if they stood against such a people. Some even whispered of alliances with humanity, seeing in them not barbarians, but a rising power that could protect them from the Council's grip. The galaxy trembled not from fear alone, but from change. The Council signed terms not of surrender, but of respect. Trade routes were reopened, but this time on human conditions. Borders were acknowledged and treaties were written in the language of equality. Humanity had not only survived exile, they had remade the Order of the Stars. The vote that had once been meant to erase them had instead carved their name into history forever. As the first human flagship bearing the black colors of exile and the silver emblem of Earth passed through Council space under salute, Steele stood at its bridge watching the stars unfold before him. He thought of the day he had walked out of the Council chamber humiliated and silent. Now the galaxy itself bowed its head. Humanity had been cast into the dark, but they had learned to master it. And in mastering the dark, they had claimed the light. The end of exile was not a return to chains, but the beginning of freedom. The galaxy had been warned. Never again would humanity wait to be told twice. Humanity's ascension. The stars had long been a place where humanity looked upward with wonder, but now they looked upon them with the eyes of builders, conquerors, and survivors. Exile had been meant to shatter them, yet in truth it had burned away hesitation and left only resolve. Where once the Council had ruled without question, there now stood a shadow they had created themselves. That shadow had become the Black Fleet, and that fleet had become the voice of Earth. The memory of the Council's vote lingered still among the people. They remembered how alien voices had dismissed them as reckless, dangerous, unworthy. They remembered how humiliation had turned to silence and silence had turned to action. What the galaxy had mistaken for weakness had in truth been the forging of iron. When the first black hulls emerged, from their hidden docks they carried with them not only weapons, but the unyielding will of an entire species. Generations would look back upon the day of exile not with sorrow but with pride. It would be remembered as the hour when Earth cast away its shackles and rose unchained. Children would speak in classrooms not of defeat but of awakening. They would recite the names of captains and engineers who had given their lives to shape the Black Fleet. They would speak of miners who became soldiers, farmers who became strategists, and scientists who became the architects of a new order. Humanity's story would no longer be written by alien decree. It would be carved into the stars by their own hands. In the Council chamber, the memory of humanity now brought silence. No delegate laughed when the word Earth was spoken. No ambassador dared call them primitive. Instead, there was caution, there was respect, and beneath it all there was fear. The Council had given its verdict, and humanity had turned that verdict into fire. That fire now burned at the edges of every sector, a fire that no fleet could easily quench. Ambassador Steele, who had once walked from the chamber humiliated, now stood on the bridge of a flagship watching stars bend under its engines. He thought of the journey that had brought them here and of the people who had refused to kneel. His voice carried across the ship, steady and certain. "We are no longer the exiled. We are the architects of tomorrow. Let the galaxy remember this day not as the day they cast us out, but as the day we claimed the stars." The Black Fleet spread across the void not as invaders without purpose, but as guardians of humanity's future. Where once alien patrols had watched them with contempt, now they watched with wary respect. Where once colonies had trembled under the weight of alien decree, now they stood tall under banners of Earth. The exile that was meant to reduce humanity to nothing had instead lifted them higher than they had ever stood. The story of humanity and the stars had changed forever. They would not wait to be told twice. They would not bow when commanded. They would not vanish into silence. They would rise again and again until the galaxy itself had no choice but to acknowledge them, and so the dark became their crucible, and the stars became their inheritance. Humanity's exile was never an ending. It was the beginning of an empire that no council decree could erase. The end,